Thank you so much. This session is to address the issue for contemporary education, contemporary issue in pedagogy. But within this course, we will address the latest contemporary issue on the United Nations, which has adopted the Universal Declaration or UN Declaration on Human Rights Training and Education. This is really a contemporary issue from education perspective. There are three main issues that we will address at this session. One is the background of why, how the UN adopted this UN declarations. And secondly, what is the substance or the content of this UN declaration, and the very last is the summary. Let me start to address the background. Here, the entire world, we have 194 countries across the globe with 7.2, 7.3 billion people to live in this one planet. And the nature of human life across the planet, we have three polarization over here. One is the first world, that those who live in capitalistic nations in Western Europe, in USA, in the North, those who are the developed nations, industrialized nations, highly income per capita nations. And the second world is those who live in the socialistic states, socialistic nation like China, Cuba, Eastern Europe, and former Soviet Union. And now we have the Russia. So that's the second polarization. The third one is those who are not belong to the first world or the second world. This is really the root, the history of Asian African Conference that initiated by Indonesia in 1955. Indonesia hosted the Asian African Conference from 18 April to 24 April in 1955. So shortly after the Asian African Conference in Bandung, President Sukarno, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and President Nehru of India, Marshal Tito of former Yugoslavia, then declared the non-aligned movement. But the root of non-aligned movement is deeply rooted from the Asian African Conference. Today we have 114 countries as a member of non-aligned movement. So this is just a reflection when I was still at the United Nations with Boutros Ghali. One day we were in Hamburg, and Perez de Cuellar, former UN Secretary General, we were in UNESCO headquarters in Paris. And what is actually the human rights notes or record in the history of human civilization? UN classify in three different paths. First is the prior to 19th century, we call it Dark Ages. Indonesia at that time was still under Dutch colony for more than 350 years. That's we call the dark history of human family. Most Asian African countries were not yet enjoy freedom. They were still under the colonization of the West. And the 20th century, UN call it the century of violence, because so many violence across the planet. Well, we have the first and the second world war that caused some more than 60 million people loss of life, and the implication, the great poverty, starvation, and violence in many parts of the world. So that's the reason why we are dreaming that hopefully we could achieve a peaceful world in the 21st century. Because every single day in the 20th century, for 100 years, every single day, according to Professor Ramel, a great historian and human rights record, noted that at least 5,500 people die, killed, violated with massive violence across the planet. Look at the situation in Cambodia during Khmer Rouge. Look at the situation in Argentina during military regime. I visited Uganda a few months prior to COVID, and I noticed that Kampala and Uganda during Idi Amin, you see really torture the people, well uncounted people die during that time. Look at El Salvador, 2.5% of the total population were killed because of people are not able to live together in harmony. So that's really very, very traumatizing of the past. This is the record that I have shown to you. And one day I also visited a few countries in Middle East. This is in Baghdad. And before this, I visited Damascus, Syria. I traveled by road from the city of Beirut to Damascus, and also I visited Tripoli, Tehran, and Qom. And I was so deeply impressed with the great devastation, mass movement, mass violence, and because of, you see, the inability to live in harmony. But what is going on at the moment, we are now in the 21 years after the first day of 21st century. We have 2 months now, March 15th, so 2 months, 15 days. We have traveled at the 21st century, but we are still watching the bloody tension remain exist across Middle East, across North Africa, even across South Asia. We have, you see, the tension in Rohingya. We have the tension in Myanmar very recently because of military intervention. We have Mindanao tension because of separatist movement. We are still having all those bloody tension. It seems that no significant change that what we have during 20th century. And this is the world record that we have all part of the world. Means that there's a great violence we have in many parts of the globe. And not only loss of life, but we lost economically, socially, culturally, the great implication that you see bring the marginalization of the people across the planet. Now let me start with the second point. So that was the reason why United Nations Declaration needs to address the issue of peace. We have 14 articles within this declaration, but this is based on human rights education and training is about through and for human rights, means that human rights for all and all for human rights. And it is indeed a lifelong process. And the preamble of this declaration fully revert to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, reverse to World Conference on Human Rights, and we have also the 2005 World Summit outcome. The first article remained that the fundamental right of human family has the right to know, to seek and receive information about fundamental freedom and about their dignity, about human rights. And secondly, the human rights education is about human rights, through human rights, and for human rights. And the third article that this human rights education and training is a lifelong process and concern all part of society at all level of education, including primary, secondary, until university level. So this is actually a lifelong process and borderless process. And human rights education should be based on the spirit of principle of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all human rights instruments. And the next is human rights should be particularly, well, no difference, no discrimination between men and girls, boys, women and men, girls and boys. And the sixth article encouraged the use of IT, technology of information, communication technologies, especially now it's greatly demanded because of pandemic that we have during the last over 13 months or so. The seventh article is that, well, the most responsible to implement this human rights education and training is the government. The government should be the prime engine, the prime mover to promote human rights education and training. And also has to develop and promote strategies, policies, and action plan and how to implement human rights education for all citizens. The ninth article is that human rights education should be based on Paris Principle, which is referred to the, well, the mission for monitoring, advising, and relating with any other international agencies, and to be a quasi-judicial, that we hope that university can take part on this mission. The next article is that media, institutions, families, NGOs should hand in hand to implement this one. And also civil, military, police personnel, all under United Nations should, well, be very committed to implement human rights education and training across all United Nations system. And the next is that human rights mechanism has to take account into their work, encourage states to include information and measure to have adopted on human rights education and report mechanism where relevant, because United Nations has system, ASEAN has also system, Asia Pacific has also system. This is the last article, the 14th article, that every nation should ensure that the effective implementation for this UN Declaration on Human Rights Education to be properly implemented. So that's overall, and this is the summary for to put this human rights education and training into a framework for peace, a social cohesion of all human family across the planet. We should properly understand, implement the value of inclusiveness, understand the value of rule of law, understand the value of democratic value, democratize the system, access and equal opportunity for all, no discrimination, political, economic, social, culturally. So hopefully there will be no corruption, there will be no inaccountability to run administration, and the very last is openness. So this is the very last, this is the picture that I took when the two Germany, East and West Germany, this Berlin Wall, that was not yet destroyed at the time. Luckily, I could take this picture, but look at that side on West Germany. There's enjoy prosperity, happiness, peace, because of they really promote and protect human rights and dignity. But Eastern Europe, look at the starvation, people you see intimidated, there's no security issues at that block. So after the reunification of two Germanys, West Germany heavily supported at least 16 billion euro to put East Germany recover because of so many economic, social, and political issues in this bloc. So that's all, and hopefully this presentation will trigger you to more deeply to understand the nature of human rights as adopted by United Nations in 2012. And luckily, I was a part of this long process, both in the session or the meeting in Geneva or in New York, in my capacity as Director General of Human Rights of the Republic of Indonesia. I think that's enough. Thank you so much.